Hello, everybody.
Hi.
I think we are now live.
I think we're live. Yes.
We
Hello,
are.
Mooncom.
Yay. Welcome to our pagan parenting panel, I suppose.
Yeah, the Pagan Parenting Panel. I'm Mabh Savage. I'm the author of Celtic Witchcraft and A Modern Celt, and I am part of the Pagan Federation Children and Families team. What are you ladies?
My name's Debi Gregory, and I am the author of the LMM Pals. I've been speaking on pagan parenting for about 8 years, something like that, and helping to create community provisions and resources for families and the disabled and neurodiversity people and stuff like that for about 6 years.
Okay. I'm Fiona Tinker. I'm the author of Stories for the Songs of the Year, which is a book aimed at pagan parents and their children. I was the education officer for the Scottish Pagan Federation for about a dozen years and had an awful lot of involvement with both parents and the education system up here. Okay. Thank you. So, shall we start talking about some of the things we looked at when we met before?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we struggled, didn't we, to sort of condense the wealth of subjects sort of down to a 45-minute talk, and decided that some of the things, some of the things that we discussed were obviously stereotypes that children are exposed to, of witchcraft, paganism, and that kind of thing. And I remember Fiona made a good point about Disney, and the depictions in there of not just witchcraft, though, it's other paganism as well, isn't it? There's so much paganism in sort of Disney that people just don't notice.
No, they take the old stories and they sanitize them, and they do kind of tend to give them that duality of good versus evil. And of course, the evil side is always the negative stereotype of either witchcraft or paganism. And it's no understanding that maybe these old stories have got a real wealth of depth to them, but they're not actually portraying that. If you compare it to something like Brave, where it's a completely different depiction entirely. The magic is neither good nor bad, it's how it's used. So, and then one of you mentioned a couple of the current children's programs, and I was like, I don't know, but I'm really curious about those. What's come along? I mean, I'm a grandmother now, so I'm not looking at Tots television, thank God. Teletubbies was enough for anybody. But
I mean, one of the ones that we discussed, Mav, was Ben and Holly's Little Kingdom, wasn't it? And this sort of depiction that all of the fairies within, because it's set within this world with, you know, little fairies and elves, and those characters have, like Fiona has said with Brave, they've got a complexity to them. Some are good, some are bad, some are just nuisances, some are all right at heart, but they get things wrong. So you've got these little characters that are supposed to be the heroes and the heroines and the whatever the non-gendered version of that is. I can't think of one off the top of my head. But then you get the witch. And the witch is grey-skinned and she's covered in warts and she's got this really disgustingly messy house that Nanny Plum feels that she has to clean. And then the witch gets really, really mad and says, "That was very rude. This is how I like my house." Yeah. And okay, there's a bit of female empowerment going on there, and this woman saying, "Don't come into my house and change things. That's incredibly rude of you." And she does teach Nanny Plum a lesson. But this idea that a witch loves to live in squalor and that she should be entitled to do so is a negative reinforcement dressed up as a positive empowerment.
Yes, absolutely, there's a lot of background there, isn't there? Like the centuries of associating witchcraft with something that's a bit dirty and a bit foul, and
which is idiotic. Considering that monks were the ones that were actually the dirtier. originally. Monasteries were disgustingly filthy at one point, and all these pagans going around smelling of fresh herbs and things like this. It's like, oh, it's ungodly. It's unseemly to be so fresh and clean. What's wrong with you? We can see your skin. Oh, it's.
Yeah, I think it's particularly because in the sort of village environment, if you had a wise person, woman or otherwise, they'd probably most likely be the cleanest person, because they'd have a sense of, actually, you don't want to get dirt in that wound, that's going to go manky, or maybe we should just get that tooth straight out and not let it rot in your head, that sort of thing. So it is strange how the association's been twisted around. And like you say, even though it's not a bad witch in Ben and Holly, they've still like, oh, well, it's almost as if that character won't be recognized as a witch unless they're grey-skinned and ugly and stuff. And it's like, it's so lovely to see something that actively challenges that stereotype for kids.
It does beg the question about what kind of stories do we share with our children. I mean, there's lots of really good stuff around now. I'm going to plug Puka, okay? I'm getting Puka in here. One of the things that I also write for, apart from Moonbooks, is a children's pagan magazine called Puka Pages, pukapages.com. It's easy to find, and it's full of crafts and stories and wonderful ideas that are not indoctrinating children, and I think that's important, but it is showing this is how pagans believe or act or maybe think about things, and what do you think? Encourages children to be themselves, like your book does, Debbie. The thing that I contribute to it is taking the old gods of Scotland and to a certain extent Ireland and giving them new stories that are meant to appeal to children, and teaching them old ways and old thoughts and old ways of honouring them, but tied up with a naughty cat and a smart-ass rabbit.
Now, I've got to say, as someone who's I've been homeschooling my children for a while, sort of on and off their entire lives, and the Puka pages were a huge resource for me in the beginning when they were particularly, I mean, they're a little bit older now, so they prefer to sort of choose their own resources, which I love. They feel empowered to do that. But in the beginning, one great thing that I loved to do with the Puka pages was you take the paganism within it, you take that little bit of education, and I linked it to history and said, okay, and even into modern social practices, and say, we take for granted things like, I was discussing this with a friend of mine, author Dan Coulter, literally just yesterday, when we were talking about warding. You say things like warding off evil, warding off negativity, but to ward is a paganism. I like to say that is a paganism. I use it as a book, and it is a paganism that we take for granted as modern people. This is just in the language that we use, but it was a pagan practice to cast wards. And it's not just within one tradition either. The Celts had this, and the Old Norse had this, and there is evidence of Saxons and all of the sort of heathen community having this, and there's even some evidence of similar practices going on in the Romans and the Greeks. So this is a universal almost paganism, if you like, so sticking these things together is a good way to sort of not only show the history, but to show how culturally we are actually still quite pagan. It's not a weird thing. It's not a thing that somebody's just made up in the 50s, as we're often told. This is a thing that has shaped our entire world. And taking it back to that and linking it to that, I found very, very useful, and the Puka pages was incredibly useful for that.
Nice.
As well as now Aether, which is obviously the Children and Families online publication, the Pagan Federation, which Mabh edits, and it's got some stuff from Fiona. Yes, it's got some stuff from Fiona in there, and it's got stuff for different age groups as well, and stuff from parents, stuff specifically aimed at children instead of for the parents. And I think that's very, very important. Parents, when you're teaching your children and when you're introducing them to your faith, don't forget that it's not just about you and your faith. ask them what they think, and make resources that are specifically for just them. And I think that that's an incredibly important thing to do. Put the narrative in their hands. That's what I tried to do with my books, is to put the narrative in their hands.
Yeah, I think we're all coming from the same place with that. But the thing that I love about the magazine and the way that you've done it, Maeve, is those badges. That if I was a child, I would want to be doing those. Can you tell folk about them, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, we talked a bit about Fiona's resource book pages, and Debi started the Aether magazine for the Pagan Federation when you were an officer. Obviously, I edit that now, although the content comes from a lot of sources. And another thing that we do for pagan children and families is the Aether patches, which are, as I said before, like when you're in the Scouts or Guides, you get badged for doing things. And for the really little ones, Hey Ducky is a really good example. The little, the cake badge or whatever. But these are all based around. It starts off being based around the 4 elements. You can pick if you want to do fire badges, air badges, earth badges, water badges. And then within that, you can pick, do you want to do sound badges, which could be for air, going out and listening to how many types of birds that you can hear outside and recording it in a journal, or fire and taste, that could be making some hot and spicy food, or earth and touch, it could be about finding different textures of things, doing a scavenger hunt, and there's loads of different things out there. And we've found the really nice thing is that we've found that kids of all ages get really into this, because there's this sense of achievement. Obviously, when they achieve they can get the little patches. You can print them out, or you can actually send off for physical ones, or they can get a certificate that they just print online. And when they've done enough, they get gem certificates for having completed so many. So yeah, that's been a really nice. It's quite a gentle way of introducing pagan themes. It's not path based. It's not focused on just Wicca or just heathenry. It's about the natural world, the seasons, cycles, things you can physically see and touch using your senses. So I think that is a really good way of introducing pagan themes to kids.
From a developmental perspective, Aether is very, very good at teaching the concept of social intelligence, emotion intelligence, mindfulness, all that kind of thing. And I think that's one of the great things about the pagan faith, is that we're so in touch with nature that we tend to be in touch with ourselves on a level that maybe others aren't generally from such a young age, because you cannot possibly be so involved with nature and be so close to nature without seeing reflections within your own self, within your family, your school friends, schoolwork, all these kind of things, because everything in nature has parallels in the self and in life. So drawing attention to those things from a very, very early age, in the formative years, and showing how these things work together, how these things have these parallels, the diversity and the complexity. People often think that children can't understand complex systems, and it's just not true. Children are incredibly intelligent, and it's true what they say about children's brains being sponges. When children, I'll drop a bit of neurology on you, a tiny little bit of neurology. When children are developing, they create neurons like nobody's business. All of these connections within the brain are constant. Every new thing that they learn will create a new connection in the brain. And it's not until the teenagers that they stop doing that. So everything that you are willing to teach a child, and even things that you aren't, because they pick things up whether you like it or not, they will create.
For sure. Yeah.
Exactly. So they will create mental representations for all of these things. And it's our job as parents, grandparents, godparents, aunts, uncles, community elders, teachers, older brothers and sisters. It's our job as the person, as being in that person's life, that individual's life, because they're not children, they're little individuals, they're little people, and it's our job to ensure that the majority, at least, because it'll never be 100%, but the majority of these mental representations that they make are positive, empowering, enlightening, inspiring, useful ones. And then when they get into the teenage years, a process happens called mylation, wherein all of the connections that aren't useful and aren't being used and aren't being strengthened by constant reinforcement will die off. completely normal, and then the ones that are useful will strengthen. That's the violation. So when they get into those teenage years and they start to be a little bit more independent and they start to reinforce their own thought patterns by reading books and having discussions with their peers and things like that, if you've given them the right foundation during their and their middle childhood and their infancy, if you use the resources that are available, like Fiona's books and Mabh magazine and the patches and Puka pages and all these things, if you use all these things and create a solid foundation, when they step out and start doing that exploration on their own, you've got no need to worry, because they'll have that foundation, positive, empowered, inspirational, ethical, moral thinking. And isn't that really what the point to being a parent?
Well,
Sure.
you don't,
Can I just go back to Puka? Puka isn't my magazine. It's the brainchild of an American woman called Laura Craig Gaddis. All the artwork and stuff in it is hers. But she's been doing it for about 25 years. So it's been going for quite a long, I know, it's been going for quite a long time. And everything that you've just said is obviously reflected in that magazine because it's so eclectic. It's not one path. It's not one way of doing things. It's loads of ways of thinking about things, of teaching kids crafts. There's a woman, I think she's in Yorkshire, and she produces an awful lot of fabulous crafts from what I would just look at and think is junk, but this can learn from it, and it's a lovely resource to be sharing for the stories, the crafts, the wisdom. And it does go up to about 13. And then I would imagine that what kicks in is what you've just spoken about, Debbie. So thank you. So pukapages.com, in case that got out of the last one.
Yeah.
And
I think it's important.
Should we go back to the bit?
Sorry, go on, Fiona.
Should we go? Thanks, Leslie. I was going to say, should we go back to the little bit where we were talking about the contents of stories? Because did that get cut out, or what? The stereotypes and
I think that's a really important one to sort of focus on, because again, it's all about the mental representations that children are being creating through what they're being exposed to. And if all they're seeing is, if all they're seeing is dirty pictures in hovels and female witches as well, they're always old women. Or
because the men,
elderly women. Yeah,
the male representation seems to be sage, doesn't it?
Or every time you see a druid, every time you see a druid, for example, in any kind of thing, it's always a man.
Male. It's male. Which is interesting.
With a long flowing beard, and as fabulous as beards are, what about your fresh-faced young lads?
Yeah.
My husband couldn't grow a beard until he was in his 30s, and even now it's not very lustrous. I've got to say, it's quite scabby. So
we'll love you for that, Debbie. Scabby.
No, I love his beard.
Yeah. Shall I just talk a little bit about why I write the stories that I write, just very quickly, and then we can see what else got left out, because I know that you've not had a chance to talk about yours yet, Nate, and you need to talk about the Element Pals. Anyway, the stories that I'm writing for Puka and the stories that are stories for the Songs of the Year are just new ways of looking at the old gods of Scotland and Ireland and giving you the essence of the gods, or giving parents a way to explain the essence of the gods through story without going into all the scholarly sources or anything like that. So it's new stories of old gods, hopefully entertaining. I'm really sorry. The stories are also told with the help of a rather naughty cat who is actually circling. I'm waiting on him jumping on this, and a rabbit. And the rabbit isn't here, but the cat certainly is. But these stories really do follow the Celtic Wheel of the Year as it is in Scotland. But of course, there is some crossover with Ireland. So you're getting the same gods, but told from a modern child's perspective, just so they understand what they're about. Okay. And I like your book on the elements. I really do.
that was I had no idea that writing a book for children that only had like 20 pages or so in it with like very little work would take so long to get right, because I'm training to be a developmental psychologist. It's something that I'm very, very passionate about, and I'm really, really passionate also about bringing neurominority voices to the fore, because neurominorities take up about a third of the world's population. If you put all like autism, ADHD, ADD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, if you put all of those together, it's about a third of the world's population at least that is neurodiverse. And so one of my main characters, Menmei, who is the spirit imp, is non-verbal, and they're not non-verbal in a way that is like you'd see in other, like you see autistic characters and non-verbal characters in things like Sesame Street and things like that, and they're always the classic autistic type stereotype, and Menmei isn't like that at all. She's very much like my daughter, based on my daughter and my nephew sort of smooshed together, who are both autistic. My nephew was completely non-verbal until he was about 4 or 5 years old. So a lot of the mannerisms of Menmei and the way that Menmei communicates and all that kind of thing is all very much on actual autistic non-verbal sort of macatone and expression and non-verbal communication. And I think one of the things that I tried to bring to the book was that, especially when you're in nature, especially when you're looking inward and you're looking to your spirit and you're looking to, which is why I made the spirit imp the one that was non-verbal, is because when you're looking inside yourself, you don't need verbal communication. It transcends language barriers to connect on a spiritual level. And I wanted to make that really, really clear. But the rest of it, other than the sort of fantasy leanings, because there's the 5 elements and you've got your Mother Earth who's teaching the elementals how to be big imps so that they can one day, you know, help to look after her and the children and nature and things. It was more about science than it was about paganism. And I'm not sure how I am a person who believes that magic and science are exactly the same thing. So obviously the more science you put into something, for me, that's more magic. But I had no idea just how much I'd intertwined the two together until I looked at it and went, wait,
what have I done?
How did I do that? But the general idea is, you know, all of the illustrations are completely blank. They're just line art done by the amazing Adam Sinclair Greenwood, my illustrator. He did just the line art for me so that everybody could colour it in the colours that they wanted. There's no gender attached to any of the main characters, so that children can feel empowered to put their narrative in there, whichever one of the imps that they feel most connected to, that's the one that they can connect to, regardless of race, nationality, you know, gender identity or anything like that. That's their character. If they want it, they can claim it. It's there for them. And it's not a book that I wrote. I know a lot of people who write for children write with the adults in mind, because it's the adults that buy the books at the end of the day. But I didn't do that at all. It was all about what the children wanted, what the children needed, how to empower and inspire children to get so involved with the narratives within nature. Helped a lot along the way by people like Mabh. And the people at Pagan Federation. Mike Steigel was a huge influence on the book. As a former teacher, he really helped me to put it into a teaching perspective. And I think that one of the things that people sort of, when they're looking for resources for pagan children, it's all about the magical, and it's all about the ancestral veneration. It's all about ancient traditions and all that kind of thing, which is fine. But let's bring it for children into a story now that they can. They need to be able to relate
stories
to
about the now, stories, which
exactly.
is what I'd like to do. Can we
you
just pick up
very
on
much do that with yours? It is very much a thing that is very in the here and now.
Thank you.
I think you do that very well.
Can we pick up on the teaching? Thank you. We've come an awful long way in a quarter of a century. You know that I'm a teacher too, and I've been teaching for years. Okay. I taught in England originally, down in Hampshire, and I was thinking about this after the conversation we had the other day. I remember a child coming in with a request for a special holiday leave, and what the mum had written was, "It's Beltane holiday," And the kid was really nervous about giving me, I was his form tutor, he was really nervous about giving me this form, and I just kind of looked at it, I thought, oh, brilliant, and signed it.
Yeah.
And do you know what the kid did? He burst into tears. And I have never forgotten that. And I, why earth are you crying? Apparently I had been the first person that A knew what Beltane was, and B was positive about it. And then I look, I came home to Scotland just after the millennium, and I've been teaching here since. And I look at how much more accepting the formal, I know people homeschool, but the formal education system is within both Scotland and England is becoming towards paganism. I don't know what's happening now in England, obviously, but I do know that within Scotland that parents have the right to make sure that their religion is included if they're in a non-denominational school. There's two school systems here. One is the Roman Catholic one, and that's what you sign up to.
Yeah.
And the other one is non-denominational, and that's inclusive.
Yeah.
And
Well, I mean,
parents,
here we have sacras, which are local. There's a national one.
Yeah,
There's also little
pockets.
local pockets where they discuss the local authority. And thanks
so that's
to the
not
work.
changed then.
Yeah, thanks to the work
Yeah.
of people like Mike Steigel, former teacher, former president of the Pagan Federation, it is now a rule. And I don't know how easy it is to enforce, because you do still need the representation there. You need to a lot of them will need a sort of push to do it. But this is what things like the census are important for, because if there is a certain percentage, I can't remember what it is, I will find out, and I will see about putting it on my page so that the information's there. So check out my page and I'll put the information up. If over a certain percentage of the population in that area is pagan, they have to include it as part of the religious education in that area. I will get details of the specifics, and I'm sure that Mabh will put it up on the Children and Families blog, and maybe in Aether, because it is important. And another thing that's worth mentioning is, in this country, in England, I'm not sure how it is, what it is elsewhere, but in England, you have the right to take your children out of school for religious holidays. Now, many pagans think, yeah, but we'll just do it at the weekend. We celebrate when it's okay for us. And on one hand, fine, if that's what you want to do, fine. However, do not feel the need to, and I mean, this is my sort of activist hat coming on, and this is my autism at play of refusing to conform. But why should we be the ones who have to move our religious holidays to suit a Christian calendar? If I want to take my children out to go and see a lunar eclipse, for example, because that's something that's very close in my practice, is following the cycle of the moon. If I want to do that, I should not have to feel like I have to make excuses for it, or say, well, I missed this one because it's not a weekend. When you leave school, who works 9 to 5 Monday to Friday anymore? Very, very, very few people do. So this idea that we have to conform in this way, I do not think is a good message to send to children. Why not instead teach them that sometimes rules are there for the, but however, conforming for the sake of conforming, that's not good. This is how you teach abuse cycles, to teach children to conform for the sake of it. Raise an anarchist, for God's sake.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at Pagan Dawn, which is the journal of the Pagan Federation, you can also get it as a member of the Pagan Federation and Scottish Pagan Federation in with your membership. There is an article in there in, I think, every issue called The Quiet Revolution, and it's written by Nimue Brown, who is absolutely fantastic about the quiet dignity that can be found in quiet revolutionary acts. And at the end of the day, people don't say it enough, but pagans are an oppressed minority. Our entire system of faith and our own way of living has been oppressed to the point that we were annihilated. It was genocide. So these little acts of revolution where you calmly and confidently say, this week it's Beltane, it does not fall on a weekend. However, I will be taking my children out for it. There will be an educational aspect, and they will be back in the next day. Feeling empowered to be able to do that is exactly the reason of the work of people like the Pagan Federation, the Scottish Pagan Federation, the Irish Pagan Federation, Pagan Federation International, the Druid Network, Children of Artemis, the Pagan Heathens. There's so many people working towards giving us that dignity back and stopping that kind of oppression, which is so insidious and is so pernicious that our own community calls us trouble causers. when we insist on standing up for ourselves and saying something as simple as, my child is coming out at lunchtime today and missing half a day because we want to go and watch the sunset over the beach. Might seem, oh, well, you just want them to have a holiday. No, that's part of my practice. For many pagans, the sea, rivers, lakes are a huge part of their practice. The woods are a huge part of their practice. And if someone wanted to say, I'm taking my child out for a half day because there's a religious ceremony going on and we need to go to church, we need to go to mosque, we need to go to temple, that would not be argued with. But because we're going somewhere pretty that is outside, which is, you know, way healthier to get fresh air and smell the flowers and all this kind of thing. Because they're doing something like that, it's seen as hippie and boho, and you're just doing it for attention. And I personally find that extremely demoralizing, infantizing, and I will not put up with it. But that's just me.
We had up until he retired, we had John McIntyre as our presiding officer of the Scottish Pagan Federation, and under his leadership, and under Louise Park as the vice president, we have now, well, you know that we have legal pagan marriage. You know that paganism is a recognised official religion in Scotland. So we're lucky in that we're a little bit further ahead, but we still need to be looking at a wider acceptance of the kind that you're speaking about.
I mean, the Pagan Federation that covers England and Wales, of which Mabh is a fantastic member of, I left them last year to focus on my studies. As I mentioned, I'm trained to be a developmental psychologist.
Yeah, congratulations. You've just passed, haven't you?
I've just finished.
Congratulations.
I've just finished this year. I've got another few years to go yet, but this year was really hard.
It's not the final. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was really hard this year. But thank you. That was a year that I was
done.
Well done. But the work that the Pagan Federation England and Wales are doing at the moment, before I left, I was the community support officer, and I reinvented the way that the community support team works to enable better coverage for these different. I sound like I'm being arrogant, but it's just what I did, and it's now in the very capable hands of President Sarah Kerr and community support officer Dan Cultus and people like Mabh, and they have an education team now, which is headed up by Jennifer Uzzle. Is it Uzzle or Uzzle? Uzzle? I can never say your name right, Jennifer. I apologise. But she is she is an absolute genius as a woman. She knows what she's doing, and she's actually been fighting for the rights of pagans on the RE Council for years without getting any credit, without anybody knowing what she was doing. And I said to her, if you're already doing the work, why am I asking you for advice on how to find someone? Come and do it for us. And she went, yeah, go on then. So she's there doing that while she's studying, while she's working towards a PhD, by the way, which is just phenomenal. So that team is there. There is an education team, an education and youth team. They are recruiting.
Thank you. I've done my time. Look, Jennifer, Jennifer and I. Jennifer and I got together a long time ago to discuss various education matters, and we swapped notes, and she does have a copy, she may not still have, but she certainly was given a copy of all the stuff that I'd done that ended up at Education Scotland. So I'd really like to get back in touch with her. Jennifer, if you're watching, get back in touch. Being nosy, I'd like to know how it all went, because she had a lot of plans then that were really exciting. So,
I mean, the families team as well. Mabh is the secretary for the families team. She edits Aether and does other bits and pieces. And the stuff that the families team does is there should be, I mean, there isn't a full team at the moment, is there? There isn't a families liaison in every district, but every district will have access to. But every district will have access to the families team, who is made up, I made sure of this before I left, is made up of some absolutely amazing, knowledgeable, passionate, compassionate and non-judgmental people who you can go to get advice on this kind of thing. And in Scotland as well, there's a team in Scotland with the Scottish PF. And there's also the PF has an advocacy officer. So if you want to take your kids out and you're being told no, or you're being given that fine that is now very, very popular in England and Wales for taking your children out of school, there is an advocacy officer who is speciality is actually family law. So you can get advice on how to fight this. Because by law, you are allowed to take your children out of school for religious holidays, regardless of their attendance percentage, which I think is nonsense anyway.
you do realise that a lot of folk watching this are homeschoolers and they're just going, yay, we don't have to bother.
Yeah, I'm homeschooling my kids at the moment, so it's not relevant to me either. But on the off chance that somebody does need that help, or you meet someone who needs that help, that access, that resource is there. Please do take advantage of it, because otherwise they start to get too much time on their hands and they start to put more things on their to-do list and stuff. And for the sanity of the Pagan Federation president, please don't allow that to happen. Put them to work.
Can I just say, there's obviously been a positive trickle-down effect from the work that's been going on, because not last year, because none of our lot were at school last year, or most of this year, but the year before, I know my eldest came home from school round the end of May time and had been learning about the summer solstice, and I immediately cringed and thought, oh, here we go. But actually the stuff they've been talking about was pretty inclusive. They were talking about how some people like to go down to, Stonehenge or stone circles and watch the sunrise and things like that. And there were quite a few different aspects. There were scientific aspects and there were aspects about modern paganism, and I was like, actually they've done all right there. That's a really balanced view, and I was really chuffed. But then on the other side, they seem to have they would seem quite lucky in some primary schools that they've got a bit of a good interfaith thing going on. So like they've had this stuff teaching them about certain pagan aspects. But then I've been into school painting their hands with henna when they were doing different styles of wedding. They had people from the Hindu council coming in and showing them how a Hindu wedding was performed, and so I was in painting Hindi patterns with the help of somebody from the Hindu council on 7-year-olds' hands.
I mean, I think one thing that we should be one person we should be thanking for this new respect for earth worship type practices and things like that is let's point out here the absolute treasure that is Sir David Attenborough. And the work doing. And I think the stuff that he's been doing so courageously doing for years and years and years and years and years is finally paying off to the point where people are paying attention. It's being integrated into the entire curriculum very slowly, but it is being done, especially because teachers are being given the opportunity to, they can write their own lessons, and they're interweaving it in, and the resources that the BBC are coming out with for this kind of thing for homeschoolers as well, all on the back of what David Attenborough is doing. I think he's doing the pagan community a huge favour in pushing that kind of thing.
My next book's about linking paganism to environmentalism, and it's about how the two intrinsically, if you are on a nature-based path or an earth-based religion, how can you worship the earth without being kind to it? And it absolutely feeds into that, and I absolutely agree with that, Debbie. People looking around and thinking, wow, we really better start looking after this planet, as they can't help but connect them to nature more, and what could be more pagan than that, really?
While we've been talking, I've got the BBC iPlayer on the telly, and I'm currently watching the live feed of the nature cameras, which are on 24 hours a day at this point. If you feel like, because you're homeschooling and because of the pandemic and because of stuff like that your kids aren't getting access to enough nature at the moment, that is free. And it is right there, and it is 24 hours a day that they have got. At the moment, I'm looking at these red kites, and I think they've got 3 chicks at the moment. I mean, they're currently asleep, so they're pretty boring. But you can just hear the wind through the trees, and you can hear the birds in the trees that are adjacent and things like that. And having that there and that resource is just... I mean, I've got a lot of those as well, so I can see the nature there and I can see the nature there. So there's always resources around. And if you're worried, and it's because I know that for a lot of neuro minorities sorting through, and for some people who are disabled, sorting through the many, many resources to find the right ones for you can feel a bit daunting. If you do feel that way, go to the Pagan Federation and ask them, because Mabh and Chris and their team will spoon feed you the information. It's what they're there for. Come to my page. I'm happy to do it on my page if you want to come to the LMN Pals page or mine and Mav's page together, the Ponderings of a Pagan Parent, and Fiona and the team at the Puka pages. The resources are there, and we can we will give you the information that you want, what we live for.
Puka pages has a Facebook page as well. There's there's loads of places that folk can, and a group, loads of places that folk can ask. One thing that may be worth mentioning, we're talking about children when they're little and when they're pre-teens, and you spoke about what happens in their brain when they become teenagers. It's always worth reminding people about that. They are their own person. They may not want to be pagan when they grow, and that's something that you have to accept. You know, they may lose all interest, or they may just totally reject it to fit in with their peers. And again, it's something that all you can do is plant the seed. It'll either grow or it won't. You can't force it. Again, that's something I think that is worth mentioning.
That's why we focus on, rather than, certainly with my kids, I focus on the nature aspect of it, because I think even if they grow up to not have a spiritual bone in the body, if they have a reverence for nature, I'll be happy with that. If they're kind to, you know, the planet around them,
Animals.
you know, exactly, kind to animals, kind to nature, not lopping trees down for the sake of it, you know, I'll be happy with that.
It's about having that mindfulness as well, isn't it? Teaching them that not only can the mindfulness benefit them as an individual, but it is a symbiotic relationship. Without nature, we will die. So having that reference, having that connection with nature is an act of survival.
And understanding that we're part of nature as well. Humans aren't separate to nature. We are part of nature. We're a funny old part of it, and we do some weird stuff, but we are still part of nature, and we have to understand that if it goes, we go. You know, we're not doing ourselves any favors by just taking
two things there. Yeah, that's where we've got to thank David Attenborough, like you were saying, because that's the constant reminder. But the danger is technology. You know, it's actually quite frightening how technology is removing. I see it every day in the classroom. Technology is removing kids. I mean, have you ever read Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451?
No.
You ever read that? Okay, it's a dystopian novel about technology taking over. And you look at it and you think the man was a complete visionary. I mean, I've always thought that anyway. But you've got people walking around with what he terms seashells in their ears, and they're totally disconnected and disassociated with each other. And then I walk into my classroom and I've got 30 kids sitting there with earbuds in.
I mean, technically, from a developmental perspective, there is absolutely no difference to development between playing outside and playing games outside, playing a board game and playing a computer game. There's no difference at all. That's not helping.
Even though it's just them, even though it's just them and the technology, Debbie. It's not a computer game online.
Exactly the same to their brain development. The only difference is the physiological of when you go outside, you're losing a bit of weight. So all of the snacks that you eat as a kid is you know, you're burning off the calories. Socially, it's no different. Not when it comes to cognitive pathways, it's no different. That's not helping. That's why so much technology is being made so readily available, because it has been found to not be as damaging when it's used reasonably, everything within reason, etc. Which is why it's so important to say to children, okay, we've had the technology, let's put it down for a bit and go outside, because otherwise this narrative of, oh, it's not actually bad for you is going to take over, and it's going to be, oh, it's good for you. No, that's not what the science says. The science does not say it's good for you. It just as bad for you as previous thought. So get off your backsides, go outside and play.
Do something. It's disconcerting. You walk into a room and they're all like that, and they're not just like, oh, you know, hello. Is that us being told we're running out of time?
I think we're out of time. Yes, I know we missed a bit in the middle because of technology, but I think we need to make space for the.
And that was the bit about fairy tales and witches, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh well.
I don't know about you, ladies, but I've really enjoyed that.
And I think
it was fun.
We'll have to see if we can do it again if people have a specific theme in mind rather than just sitting and chatting.
Waffling about everything we can think of, We never even covered half the stuff that we decided to talk about either.
Well, do you know, we might just have to take those notes and talk to Trevor about writing a book.
Do you know what? That's not between the three of us. That's not a bad idea. Yeah. Oh well.
Well, we will see everybody at the next MoonCon, I suppose. Then.
Yeah, and thank you very much for joining us and listening. Much appreciated.
And thank you, ladies. That's been fantastic.
It's
Okay.
wonderful. It's lovely to see you again. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.